The future of wealth seems to point towards luck rather than earning it. One of the prevailing and most eye-opening developments from Thomas Piketty's studies is that in the future, it appears that those who are lucky enough to be born into the right families will be the wealthy ones. Everyone else will probably struggle. It's likely that if current patterns continue alongside the economic growth we're seeing, the distance between those who earn a higher salary versus those who make a lower one will widen drastically. However, to be truly wealthy, it will come down to inheritance. The relationship between income and wealth continues to rise around the globe, and Thomas Piketty sees no evidence to suggest a change in that trend. If that is the case, the coming decades will look a lot like the economic situation in the 10th century. At that point, the wealthy inherited their lot and didn't work for it at all. You might wonder why nobody has noticed that this trend has been gaining speed. But Piketty argues that it has been noticed. He points to an example in Jane Austen's writing, when a man's income came from rent from his inherited estate and not from any work he did. For an economy to thrive, it needs to contain booming industries with a lot of competition to drive sales. Hereditary riches do nothing for economic success. Of course, the idea of inherited wealth isn't too far away from the class system that was primarily established during Victorian Britain. At that time, the elite were from wealthy families. With wealth passed down through the generations, few businesses became genuinely successful. And as a result, very few business owners were considered highly wealthy. That does nothing for the business market and, of course, not a lot for the economy either. According to Thomas Piketty, the rich list will consist of relatives a few generations down from the current millionaires we have today, not go-getting entrepreneurs and tech startups. Good news if you're rich. You're just going to get richer. Of course, if you're someone who already has a good amount of wealth, the chances of your situation changing are slim. If anything, your situation is probably going to improve. However, if you're someone who isn't particularly wealthy, someone who lives from paycheck to paycheck, your situation is likely to remain less than rosy. It's not great news for many. Basically, the rich are just going to get richer. And with the economic trends leading up to this point, there is no reason to assume that is going to change. Hereditary wealth has always been a bonus. However, those born into money are unlikely ever to need to work a day in their lives. In comparison, the rest of us toil daily. If you're born into wealth, you're lucky. That means you're set for life. That is a trend that will stick around. Yes, those people will probably go on to start businesses of their own. But it won't be the businesses that create their wealth. It will be their status. Sure, the business might add to what they already have, but they'd have been rich anyway. This whole situation echoes the picture seen in the earliest reaches of 20th century Europe. At that time, inherited wealth was firmly in control, and the only reason that changed slightly was the onset of World War I and then World War II. The entire economy of Europe underwent massive changes during this period, and it took several decades beyond to stabilize. Even those with inherited wealth saw their financial situation take a hit. Despite that, the situation simply returned to where it began. From Thomas Piketty's studies and from collaborating with economic scholars, he sees no reason why this shouldn't remain the same. Should no action be taken? Refusing to deal with numbers rarely serves the interest of the least well-off. Thomas Piketty. The only solution is to combat wealth inequality globally now that we know the situation. How can we change it? How can we make the future better for those who are less wealthy than the superpowers who swallow up every dollar going to spare? Thomas Piketty puts forth that the only situation is to come together as one and tax wealth. Of course, there have been echoes of this from country to country, but it has never actually come to fruition. Many hurdles are standing in the way. Countries need to come together to implement one policy, which is likely to take a considerable amount of time, not to mention a certain amount of luck. Solving an ingrained and long-standing problem like wealth inequality won't happen overnight. The seeds of change need to be sown now. The truth is that wealth taxation is unlikely to ever get off the ground because those who need to implement the policy will probably be victims of it. Thomas Piketty suggests that this taxation doesn't need to be drastic. It can be modest, but enough to make a substantial difference. The super economies need to make the first step, such as the USA, UK, and the EU. When these economies make changes, others are likely to follow. This type of policy is necessary to stop the wealthy from simply increasing their cash sitting in their various bank accounts. It's also a step that needs to be taken to prevent wealth from being shifted away from countries. For example, transferred to offshore accounts and properties. However, none of this will be possible unless large economies come together to prevent wealth inequality from becoming even worse than it is now. With money comes power. There needs to be taxation on wealth to balance things and ensure each country has cash isn't simply flowing into one wealthy family's pocket. Conclusion. It has always been the case that rich people are powerful and strong, and those with less money are left to graft and struggle. It's not fair for sure, but it has been the same throughout history. It is easy to assume that the situation is nowhere near as bad as it was during the Victorian era, but that's simply a fallacy. If you look at some of the world's superpower economies, you'll see that the balance of wealth is still significantly out of whack. You have affluent and influential families and business owners, but not too far down the street you see families who are struggling to pay their rent every month and worrying how they are going to put food on the table. Even in developing countries, the problem is still the same. There is a vast discrepancy between rich and poor in these areas. You will see leaders with huge mansions, some even lined with gold and all the riches you could ever want. However, many of their citizens are not only on the breadline but far below it. Wealth inequality is not a problem that can be solved quickly. It can't be solved by one single country either. As Thomas Piketty concludes, the world needs to come together to confront and solve this problem once and for all. That doesn't mean there will be no more wealth and no wealthy families, because that is simply unrealistic. However, fair taxation on wealth means that the balance will be much less off-kilter. That taxation can then be funneled back into the economy to help those who have less. Try the small acts of kindness go a long way. If you have more than enough, help out those less fortunate from time to time. Wealth inequality is something that needs to be addressed globally, but that starts at the grassroots level. Why not raise the issue with local government officials? Simply being aware of an issue means you can spread the word. Please speak to your friends and family and allow them to become as passionate about it as you are.
Thank you for watching. Please help us rate this video and give it a thumbs up to support the channel.